Welcome to the Breakfast Leadership Show Deep Dive, where we go beyond the headlines to uncover the stories, strategies, and mindsets driving today's top leaders. Let's dive in.
Picture this. You just survived a 90-minute strategic alignment call.
Oh, we have all been there.
Right. The energy was surprisingly high, everyone was firing on all cylinders, and some genuinely brilliant ideas were just flying across the screen. You finally reach that satisfying, consensus-driven conclusion. Everyone waves, the video window closes, and you are left staring at your own reflection in the monitor.
And then the panic sets in.
Exactly. Almost instantly, all those incredible insights and, massive breakthrough ideas just vanish into this sea of browser tabs and half-finished notebook pages. You sit there looking at a scattered list of bullet points and realize you have absolutely no idea what is actually supposed to happen next.
It is a totally pervasive phenomenon in modern corporate culture, and frankly, it's a massive drain on organizational momentum. You and your team spend all this expensive time collaborating, but if you lack a deliberate strategy for capturing the value of that collaboration, the energy just dissipates into the ether.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We are going to rescue your team's ideas from what I like to call the "we should circle back" graveyard.
I love that phrase.
Yeah, this is where good ideas go to die. So to do that, we're pulling from a really tactical piece published by the Breakfast Leadership Network. It's titled "How to Keep Ideas Organized After an Office Meeting." The core objective here is to transform those nebulous, wide-ranging discussions into concrete, undeniable progress.
Because what we are really talking about here is not a failure of creativity or even a lack of good intentions. It is fundamentally a failure of process. Capturing the value from your meetings is not about taking denser notes or typing faster. It's about strategy.
Okay, let's unpack this. The Breakfast Leadership Network piece anchors its entire philosophy on this concept they call the golden 10 minutes.
The crucial make-or-break window.
Exactly. They argue that the first 10 minutes after everyone logs off dictates whether an idea becomes a tangible action or just quietly fades away.
Because that specific window is where the battle for execution is either won or lost. It's about distilling hours of complex conversation into executable reality while it's still fresh. If you fail to manage that immediate transition correctly, a significant portion of the time you just invested in that room was essentially wasted.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second here. Because in my experience, the immediate reflex is to try and write down a massive, comprehensive transcript of everything that was said, to make sure nothing is missed.
Which is the exact trap most conscientious professionals fall into.
Right, but the source material explicitly calls this the anti-transcript rule, claiming that a verbatim record is a huge mistake. But if we only extract a few outcomes, don't we risk losing the nuance? Like, what if there's a dispute a month later about why a specific strategic pivot was made?
I mean, you think you are protecting the project by capturing every detail, but a wall of notes is practically useless for future execution. If you go back to a verbatim transcript 3 weeks later, you have to mentally relitigate the entire meeting just to figure out what your next task is.
Which is an immense cognitive load.
Exactly. Now, to your point about losing the nuance for compliance or historical disputes, that is where you have to separate the archive from the execution tool. The execution tool cannot be a transcript. The source material instructs us to abandon the transcript and extract only the big three.
The big three. It is a ruthless filter. So number 1 is decisions made, number 2 is actions assigned, and number 3 is open questions. That is the entire framework.
Think about the absolute clarity that provides to a team. By filtering your notes down to those 3 specific categories, you strip away the conversational fluff, the tangents, the political posturing, and the brainstorming dead ends.
You're left with a highly concentrated dose of progress.
Exactly. Decisions made provides the team with a new baseline of truth. Actions assigned dictates the forward momentum, and open questions explicitly acknowledges what is still unresolved. It prevents complex issues from simply being swept under the rug.
The piece also introduces a brilliant stress test for this framework. It says your wording for these big 3 items must be simple and specific enough that a colleague who completely missed the meeting could read it and know exactly what to do.
The zero context test.
Yeah, so if I write down a bullet point that just says, look into the Q3 marketing budget, that immediately fails the test.
What is fascinating here is how that specific stress test forces the note-taker to abandon vague corporate jargon. You can't hide behind phrases like synergize the deliverables or look into marketing. You have to translate the abstract discussion into concrete reality.
So look into marketing must become something like Sarah to draft a revised budget proposal for the Q3 email campaign by Thursday at 5 p.m.
Precisely. It leaves zero room for misinterpretation. It shifts the burden of clarity from the reader back to the writer.
That makes total sense, but executing that in real time is incredibly difficult. I mean, you cannot be actively debating a complex, high-stakes topic, reading the room, managing personalities, and simultaneously writing down a perfectly distilled, jargon-free summary of what was just agreed upon.
It is entirely too much cognitive load for a single facilitator.
Which brings us to the tech layer, the article suggests. They specifically reference using AI-powered meeting assistants like Fireflies.ai as a safety net. But honestly, I know a lot of leaders who are skeptical of relying on AI for this. There's a real fear of hallucinations or the AI entirely missing the subtext of a nuanced conversation.
The skepticism is entirely valid if you view AI as a replacement for human judgment, which is not what the source material is advocating.
Right, it's not a replacement.
Not at all. AI is acting as an increasingly vital layer of raw data capture. Modern tools use natural language processing not just to transcribe audio, but to parse intent. They are designed to flag action verbs, identify deadlines mentioned in crosstalk, and structure raw summaries.
Especially in those fast-moving, multi-stakeholder meetings where human note-taking simply cannot keep pace with the sheer volume of information.
Exactly. So the human-AI workflow is what actually makes this methodology functional.
The human is absolutely still in the loop.
The workflow fundamentally shifts. Instead of relying solely on your own manual notes, which are prone to your inherent biases and the natural decay of human memory leaders, review the AI-generated output during those golden 10 minutes.
So the AI gives you the raw materials.
Yes. The AI provides the raw, comprehensive data layer. It highlights the action items and the follow-up questions it detected. The human leader then uses that to quickly verify agreements, fill in any contextual gaps, and curate the final big three list.
The AI is the net, and the human is the final editor providing the sign-off.
Which immediately relieves the pressure on the meeting facilitator. You can actually look your colleagues in the eye, read their body language, and listen to their concerns, rather than frantically staring at your keyboard playing stenographer.
Okay, so we've utilized our golden 10 minutes. We've extracted our big three, perhaps with our AI safety net. Now we arrive at what I think is the most dangerous organizational trap discussed in the piece.
The ghost action item.
The ghost action item, yes. You are looking at a master list of tasks. Everyone nods enthusiastically about updating the client portal. And then next week, absolutely nothing has happened because everyone silently assumed we meant someone else.
You are describing the classic bystander effect applied directly to corporate project management. It is fatal to momentum. Highly paid, highly intelligent professionals fall victim to this kind of social loafing all the time.
Because when a task is assigned to a group, the psychological diffusion of responsibility practically guarantees that the task will be delayed or ignored entirely.
Exactly. So to combat that diffusion of responsibility, the article introduces a rather uncompromising mandate, the rule of one.
Every single action item must have a single owner, not a department, not a steering committee, not a collaborative team, one specific human being. And it needs a tangible deadline that can be plotted on a calendar.
It is non-negotiable in this framework.
But let me push back on this because modern work is incredibly cross-functional. Doesn't making one person the sole owner of a massive task create a dangerous bottleneck? Like what if the task is something huge, like integrate the new payment API? One person can't code that, test that, and market that alone.
The source material addresses that exact reality with a specific caveat called the coordinator clause.
The coordinator clause.
Right. If a task genuinely requires multiple people or departments to execute, you still do not assign it to a group. You name exactly one person who is responsible for coordinating the effort. That person becomes the single point of failure and the single point of contact.
So using the API example, if marketing assumes engineering is handling the launch and engineering assumes marketing is handling the client communication, the whole thing crashes. The coordinator clause prevents that standoff.
Exactly. The appointed coordinator might delegate the actual coding to 3 different engineers and the messaging to the marketing team. But if the project falls behind schedule, leadership knows exactly who to speak with to identify the blocker.
Accountability requires absolute clarity.
If ownership is shared, accountability is diluted. The rule of one forces that clarity right at the moment the meeting ends, eliminating the dangerous ambiguity that leads to organizational stagnation.
It's like the old adage, a short list of 3 action items with crystal clear individual ownership will always beat a sprawling, ambitious list of 10 tasks where nobody feels personally accountable.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have assigned our task ruthlessly. But we can't just leave these beautifully delegated assignments buried in a private Notion doc or hidden in someone's personal email inbox.
Yeah.
If ideas aren't visible, they lose momentum.
This is the crucial pivot from individual accountability to broader team alignment. Making ideas visible is essential, particularly in complex ongoing projects where multiple dependencies exist. In a busy, distributed work environment, out of sight truly is out of mind.
And the Breakfast Leadership Network piece details the specific architecture of an effective whiteboard layout to combat this.
Yes.
And to be clear for you listening, we aren't just talking about a literal dry erase board in a physical conference room. While that works, the article notes this exact same architecture applies to digital canvases for hybrid teams. Whether you are using Jira, Asana, Monday.com, or a shared Notion workspace.
It is not about the specific software you purchase.
Right. But I have to ask, most teams already use these tools, and yet tasks still get lost. Is this just adding another layer of administrative tracking?
The friction usually comes from overly complex project management boards that require a training manual just to decipher. The text outlines a strict, stripped-down structure requiring exactly 4 columns, no more, no less.
Let's walk through that 4-column architecture. Column 1 is priorities, what is actually moving the needle right now. Column 2 is owners, which ties directly back to a rule of 1. Column 3 is blockers, highlighting what is actively standing in the way of progress. And column 4 is next milestones, defining what immediate success looks like.
This specific structure is highly intentional. It creates a complete, instantly digestible narrative of the project's status at a single glance. You immediately know what matters, who is driving it, what is stopping them, and where the project is headed next.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The article introduces what it calls the walk-by test. The ultimate goal of this 4-column layout is that anyone from a junior associate to the CEO should be able to walk by that physical whiteboard or log into that specific digital dashboard and immediately understand exactly what has changed since the last alignment meeting.
Without having to ask anyone for a status update. That is the hallmark of effective asynchronous communication. It creates a self-reporting system.
You don't need to schedule another 30-minute meeting just to get a status update. The status is visually present at all times.
Furthermore, it naturally guides the team's attention to where it's most needed. If there are suddenly 5 items stacked in the blockers column, the team's collective focus is organically drawn there, prompting immediate, targeted collaboration to clear those hurdles.
It turns a static archive into a dynamic operational tool. All right, we are rounding the corner here, and this brings us to a critical mindset shift discussed in the text. We need to completely redefine the actual end of a meeting.
This is a profound shift in corporate psychology. The traditional view is that a meeting is over when the video call ends, or when people physically walk out of the room. The source material argues that this is fundamentally incorrect.
A meeting is not finished when the discussion ends. It is only finished when the recap is shared and the next steps are universally understood.
Closing the laptop is just step 1. Step 2 is closing the loop.
And the article is very prescriptive about the exact anatomy of what that follow-up message should look like. The overarching rule is that it must be a short, highly scannable message. In the modern workplace, if you write a long, nuanced paragraph summarizing a meeting, people will simply skip it. They just do not have the time.
Scannability is paramount. Professionals today are managing an overwhelming deluge of communication. When they open a recap email or a Slack message, they are aggressively scanning for their own name and their specific action items. If you bury those in a block of text, the execution fails before it even begins.
So keep it heavily bulleted. You include those big 3 we extracted during our golden 10 minutes, the decisions made, the action items linked to their single owners with hard deadlines, and vitally, a direct link to the source of truth, that digital 4-column whiteboard we just discussed.
And regarding those open questions we flagged earlier, the follow-up must explicitly state exactly who is tracking them and when an update is expected. Again, we are enforcing the rule of 1, even for unresolved issues.
You can't just write, "We still need to figure out the software licensing." You have to write, "David is tracking the software licensing issue and will update the team in Slack by Thursday at noon." The article calls this creating a clean handoff from discussion to execution. So what does this all mean for the listener who is trying to implement this with their own team?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this entire methodology, seizing the golden 10 minutes, extracting the big three instead of transcribing, enforcing the rule of one, maintaining the 4-column visual board, and sending scannable follow-ups, it all points to one ultimate, unyielding thesis. Ideas do not stay organized because people have good intentions.
That is the hard truth, isn't it? Good intentions do not ship products.
They never do. Ideas stay organized and projects actually get executed because the process makes it exceedingly difficult to lose them. By building this specific architecture, you ensure that follow-through becomes the default behavioral pathway rather than a heroic exception. You are systematically removing the friction from execution.
And for you listening right now, the reason you should care about implementing this rigorous architecture is because it fiercely protects the value of the time you have already spent. You've already sat through that exhausting hour-long meeting. Do not let that hour evaporate into thin air simply because you couldn't dedicate 5 minutes to organizing the output.
It is ultimately an investment in your own future productivity. A few minutes of disciplined, structured process post-meeting will save you hours of confusion, redundant emails, and stalled momentum later in the week.
Doing these small, disciplined steps right away ensures your meetings produce actual, tangible progress instead of just resulting in scheduling yet another meeting to figure out what happened in the last one. Let's do a quick recap of the journey we've taken on this deep dive.
We started by recognizing the critical importance of dominating those golden 10 minutes right after a meeting concludes.
We learned to abandon the exhaustive transcripts and instead ruthlessly extract the big three decisions, actions, and open questions. We explored how to leverage AI note-takers not as perfect replacements, but as a raw data safety net to alleviate cognitive load.
We dissected the bystander effect and learned to ruthlessly enforce the rule of one to ensure single ownership and real deadlines.
We built an architecture of visibility using a 4-column board to pass the walk-by test. And finally, we redefined the end of a meeting by ensuring it only closes with a scannable, action-oriented recap.
It is a comprehensive, highly effective system for translating abstract talk into concrete action. But, as with any strict methodology, optimizing so heavily for one outcome often impacts another, which raises an important question for you to consider. If our post-meeting process is now perfectly optimized to instantly generate strict actions, hard deadlines, and single owners, how might this relentless drive for immediate execution fundamentally change the nature of creative brainstorming itself? Do we risk squeezing out the messy, unstructured what-ifs and the necessary friction of innovation in our rush to confidently assign the who and when?
That is a fascinating tension to end on. It brings up a real paradox.
Yeah.
We absolutely need strict, unforgiving processes to execute effectively, but we also need unstructured, forgiving freedom to ideate in the first place. Finding the balance between those two extremes is definitely something for all of us to ponder the next time we are setting up a meeting agenda. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you leave this conversation feeling empowered to tackle your next strategic alignment, armed with the tactical tools to turn your team's great ideas into undeniable reality. Have a great day and go dominate those golden 10 minutes.